In the latest UK housing review, Dr Peter Williams from the University of Cambridge looks at the recent trends in the housing market. The chapter covers everything from the apparent decline in the private rented sector to the sharp fall in the number of first-time buyers. For CIH Unlocked, I talked with Dr Williams to delve further into the detail. Okay, so before we jump into some of the detail within the chapter, could you start by giving us a bit of an overview, a bit of background to the chapter and how it came about?
Yeah, sure thing, Liam. I mean, the general readership of UK Housing Review is probably focused on the social housing sector. So every year we try to provide an overview of what the private market is doing, because in many senses that offers the operating context for social housing organisations, and the weaknesses and strengths of the private market produce the problems in part that social housing has to grapple with. So we try and paint that picture, and what this chapter does this year, because obviously it changes all the time, it paints a picture in which there's a gentle but steady, in my view, market recovery going on underway, and that is slightly stronger than many analysts would have predicted late 2023. And so, you know, there are still tensions in the private rented sector and first-time buyers. I'm sure we'll come to them, but I do think fundamentally analysts tend to underestimate the strength of the demand side, that the pent-up demand, the additional assistance which parents can bring, the wage growth, albeit very varied regionally, rural, urban, etc., that has been going on, plus, albeit much heightened, but stable-ish interest rates.
Yeah.
So I think that paints the picture of where the private market is in broad terms.
Yeah, and you've touched on it there a little bit, but you know that you mentioned how the market has kind of performed differently to how many people thought it would, especially as we've kind of come out of the pandemic. In what ways specifically has it performed differently?
Well, house prices, most people were still talking, late last year, they were still talking about house prices in 2024 being the peak year of decline, with perhaps up to 10% fall in house prices. That is very unlikely to take place. Obviously, it's still possible. We're in a volatile world where things can happen which we can't anticipate. But on current evidence, the market is looking not going to have a negative market this year, that there will be strong market growth this year. So prices up, transactions up, and interest rates hopefully steadying and falling towards the end of the year.
That in the chapter it mentions that the private rented sector in particular has started to shrink, albeit slightly. Do we expect it to continue shrinking over the coming months?
The PRS is a real problem area in all sorts of ways, but not least in terms of data and understanding. We don't have good data on the private rented sector, particularly the issue you're touching on about, is it growing, is it declining? The evidence is thin. Now, Hamptons have done some decent work here on net gains and losses, because obviously at any moment you've got landlords buying and you've got landlords selling. It's the net effect in some senses. And when landlords are selling, some of them are selling to other landlords who are buying. So there's no change. So trying to understand the dynamics of what's happened in the private rented sector are quite difficult. I think on balance, we're seeing some shrinkage. I think we could expect that, to be honest, because a lot of landlords were my generation, baby boomers. A lot of them have got to the age where they don't want the burden of being a landlord, or indeed they've died. So there will naturally be some turnover of landlords and shrinkage. Equally, I mean, I think the other thing to say is that rents have gone up. But then regulation, maybe if the reform bill comes through, will tighten things. And of course, we've got the new capital gains tax regime the government announced in the budget. All of those things kind of cast a shadow over the private rented sector. But the big question everybody has to answer is, if landlords do cash in, where are they going to put the money? I mean, It's easy to bail out, but where are you going to put it? Savings rates are higher than they were, so that might be attractive. Bond market might be, stocks and shares might be, but actually for many people, they would still think that property-related assets with house price inflation, particularly now house price inflation seems to be recovering, that's a good place to stay.
Yeah. So the chapter also notes that the number of first-time buyers is falling sharply. So I imagine, this could be quite a complex kind of question to answer. But what factors are at play here?
Well, it's fundamentally affordability. I mean, the problem now with cost of living increases, albeit flattening off, with interest rates having gone up sharply, albeit now flattening off, but still at a much higher level, and with wage growth being up, but very selectively. If you look at rural wage growth, it's often much lower than urban wage growth. And you look at regional wage growth, and some regions have much stronger wage growth than others. So there's no universal picture in which says wage growth is coming to the rescue of affordability. So I think affordability is the fundamental factor, and people are coming to terms now with higher interest rates. You're of the generation that really grew up where interest rates were very low. I'm of a generation that grew up where interest rates were very high. For me, anything below 8 is low. But for your generation, it's high. And people have to think about how they can adjust to that. And people can adjust to that to some degree, whether it's if they're lucky enough to have parents who are homeowners, to borrow from parents, to get on the few government schemes that still exist, to look for a longer term mortgage, albeit we're now up to 40 years. And frankly, you can't stretch it. There's no point in stretching much beyond that. So some of the mitigants are there, but equally some of the mitigants, we've run out of road room on them.
In terms of affordability, the chapter refers to schemes such as the shared ownership scheme that's kind of being rolled out. It is a very important kind of part of the market. But how do we keep delivering these shared ownership properties and promoting shared ownership while also kind of mitigating these potential downsides?
To provide context, shared ownership's been around since 1980. Over that time, since then, around 400,000 units of shared ownership have been built, 200,000 of which remain in shared ownership, the rest are staircased out. So shared ownership, of all the low-cost home ownership schemes, strikes at the lowest income point. So it's very valuable in terms of addressing the point I touched on previously about income inequality. It helps the lower income households get into home ownership. Now, the Deluxe report is really very important, and it comes on the back of a growing volume of complaints about shared ownership over the last decade or more. And I think what I am hoping that report, and also the creation of the Shared Ownership Council, which is something I've been involved in, which is a cross-industry, lenders, brokers, providers coming together to build a strong code of good practice around shared ownership and to address a range of outstanding reform issues on shared ownership. That industry-led initiative, along with the impetus provided by the Levelling Up Committee, does provide, I think, in the next 2 years, a real landscape in which we can bring in reforms and improvements to shared ownership that should rebalance it to a much more consumer-focused tenure, and one which can grow and thrive more than it has done in the past. So it's been effective, but it could be a lot more effective. And I think we'd like to see that grow and develop, not least, of course, through the reforms to leasehold, which sits over shared ownership, and actually we have to address as well.
In terms of house prices, I mean, as the chapter notes, they've been falling over the past couple of years, but it seems like they've been falling perhaps not as much as people thought they would. Will they continue to fall, do you think, or are we due for a bit of a turnaround?
Well, I mean, we will continue to get month by month variations, as you may be aware. I mean, there are about 5 different house price indices operating in the UK. Well, across the UK, it's probably about 9, and all of them come up with different numbers because they all survey different things, they all survey at different times, and they all count in different ways. So
Yeah.
We get misleading images on house prices. But I think broadly, if there's a consensus, it is that prices are edging up. We've probably reached the turning point in the market in England and Wales, and the recovery is underway. We always get a spring boom. For some reason, people think about moving home around Easter, partly because they don't think about moving home around Christmas. And that obviously impacts on prices achieved. It means more properties are coming onto the market and more people are looking, and there's some evidence to support that. So we'll see that. I think we'll see that process roll through. Obviously, a lot of people have got to take account of the worsened affordability. And I don't think we're going to see rampant house price inflation. I don't want rampant house price inflation. I think you, like me, would probably argue for a relatively stable home ownership market is the best solution.
Okay, I feel like this has kind of answered my next question a little bit, but the chapter also touches on the issue of negative equity, which obviously was kind of a big issue around 2008 when we had the financial crash. Is that something borrowers should be concerned about?
They should always be concerned about it because it should influence their timing into the market and the extent to which they overbid or underbid for property. So negative equity should always be in their mind. But in terms of it actually arising as a general consequence, unlikely, I think. There will be individuals. I mean, typically now, as prices have come off the peak that they got to in late 22, early 23, somebody who's bought at the peak will see their price currently, let's say, 5% down on that. If they had to move right now, they may find that they're selling it at a loss. So they will be in negative equity. But broadly, most people can sit it out. And obviously, if you do need to move, you can rent it out. So subject to your capacity to buy somewhere else or rent something else, you can manage around it. So I don't think negative equity will be a big issue, but people should always be aware of it.